Within the past week, many of us have seen different news headlines about this year's TCAP data. And guess what? Many of the headlines are true. In this video, I want to take a deeper dive into the data. More so, I want to begin generating conversations about the why. And most importantly, I have a call to action for parents. Hi, I'm Dr. Dearia Shields. I've spent the last 11 years working in education as a teacher and department coach. A big part of my job has been helping teachers, students, and even parents understand data at a school level, analyzing it, and making instructional decisions. And now, I want to help you. Here's an overview of today's video. We're going to begin with the news headlines. What are they saying? In both headlines, you'll see a word, proficiency, which takes us to our next part. We're going to talk about the proficiency levels. What are they and what do they mean? From there, we're going to look at ELA data, then math data, and last but certainly not least, and I would argue the most important, we're going to look at next steps, a call to action for parents. So, what's the news? On one end, we have a more positive take. We see that TCAP proficiency has hit its highest levels since pre-pandemic years. Students are growing in math, ELA, and social studies. On the other end, we have a more concerning take. We see that while growth is happening, less than half of students are proficient in any subject. Now that we see both sides, let's look at what the data actually tells us. Before we dive into the data, let's make sure we understand proficiency levels. Here I'm going to provide you with two definitions, one more formal from the Tennessee Department of Education and one more informal. Let's start with below expectations. Students who score in the below expectations proficiency level are said to have a minimal understanding or a nominal ability to apply grade level skills and knowledge. This translates to students who need significant support in this area. At the next level up, we have students that fall in the approaching expectations proficiency level. Here, students are said to have an approaching understanding and a partial ability to apply grade level knowledge and skills. This translates to students are making progress, but they have not yet demonstrated grade level mastery. At the next level up, we have students who score in the meeting expectations proficiency level. They are said to have a comprehensive understanding and a thorough ability to apply grade level knowledge and skills. This means that students here are performing at grade level. And at the highest level, we have students that have exceeded expectations. This communicates that they have an extreme understanding and expert ability to apply grade level knowledge and skills. This means that the student has consistently demonstrated advanced understanding of their grade level standards. If you have a child that is in grades 3 through 8 or enrolled in English 1 or 2 or any high school math courses, I do want you to pay special attention to their proficiency levels at that level, okay? So we'll look at that more in the next slides. One last thing before we dive into the data. The colors that you see represent each of the proficiency levels. Teal represents the percent of students that were in the exceeded expectations proficiency level. Green, percent of students in the met. Orange, the percent of students in approaching. And red, the percent of students in below. Okay, so that will be either at the top and or bottom of this screen and future screens. Okay, so keep that in mind. So now let's actually dive into the data. So this slide represents the overall English data for the entire state, all tested grade levels. Okay, this is only data from the 2026 school year. Okay, so take that in. I'm going to share with you something that I noticed. I noticed that 42% of students are proficient. Let's take that in for a second. That means 42 out of every 100 students are proficient. Let's reduce that though. 42 out of 100, that's about 4 out of 10. So let's line up 10 kids, okay? You have 4 kids that are proficient and 6 kids that are not. Okay. My wonder from that is how can we help those 6 for every 10? That's what I'm left asking when I look at this English data overall. Okay. So I'm going to let that sit. On the next slide, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the English data. Now, let's break English down by grade levels. Here, we're just looking at elementary and middle school levels from grades 3 through 8. And remember, you see the color scheme both at the top and the bottom representing the different proficiency levels. This slide is a little bit more dense because here we see 2 years of data represented. The dotted line shows us last year's TCAP, so 2025 TCAP, and then the straight line shows us this year's TCAP, 2026 TCAP scores, okay? So I just want to communicate some of the things that I noticed. I noticed that the highest proficiency is in fourth grade. I also noticed that the lowest proficiency rate is in eighth grade. I also noticed that while fourth grade is the highest, that it did drop, albeit 1%, but a drop nonetheless. So on average, this means that for grades 3 through 8, about 3 out of every 10 kids are proficient. Again, I want you to line those 10 kids up. I want you to pick out 3. They are proficient. The other 7 are not proficient when we think about grades 3 through 8. Okay, so I just want you to let that sink in. And if you have a child in grades 3 through 8, I want you to think about it kind of twofold. Number one, where might your child fall? And then number two, where are their peers falling? Okay, so just keep that in mind as you are looking at this data for grades 3 through 8 English. So here we're looking at English by grade level, high school edition. Again, the color scheme is still the same, representing the different proficiency levels. I also want to point out here that we're looking at the proficiency rate again for the 25 TCAP compared to the 26 TCAP. Okay, so we're looking at that for both English and English 2, which are the high school courses that take end of course assessments. A couple of things that I noticed. I noticed that English 1 dropped by 2 percentage points. I also noticed that English 2 increased. I also noticed, if we think back to the slide that we just looked at, English 2 is the highest proficiency rates out of all of the tested subjects for English. And that leaves me wondering, what does English 2 do differently than English 1 in the elementary and middle schools? I mean, is there something with the curriculum, something with the training, the preparation? I actually don't know the answers to these questions, but that is what I'm left wondering when I see these data points. This slide provides us with data for English by student groups. I'm not gonna lie, this slide right here is extremely dense. And usually I wouldn't put this much information on one slide. However, I felt that chopping it into multiple slides would have taken away some of the conviction. So I decided to keep it together. But I'm not going to talk about all of the data that we see on the screen. I'm just going to talk about the TCAP scores from the 26 school year. I'm also only going to talk about the percent of students that landed in the met or exceeded proficiency levels for that subgroup or for that student group, okay? So keep that in mind as I read them aloud. I'm also going to rank them from lowest to highest percentage for proficiency levels, okay? So starting with students with disabilities, 10% of them met or exceeded expectations on TCAP. Next, we have our English language learners, 19%. Third, we have our students that are economically disadvantaged at 24%. Next, we have our Black students at 27%. Then we have our Hispanic students at 29%. White students at 50%. And at the top, the highest level is our Asian students at 69% proficiency. Okay, so keep in mind that is the percent of students that landed in the met and exceeded proficiency levels. Those are the percentages for those. This leads me to wonder, what measures are in place to close the gaps for students that scored the lowest proficiency levels? Okay, so I just read that out. We have, again, students with disabilities at 10% of them being proficient on TCAP. What's being done about that? What about the 19% of English learners? What's being done about that? Serious question that I'm wondering. Okay, all of that was ELA data. Let's move on to math. Again, we see the same color scheme, exceeded expectations for teal, met expectations green, approaching expectations yellow, below expectations red. This is only the 2026 data, and this is the math data overall. So think grades 3 through 8, and then also 3 high school math courses. The first thing I noticed is that 41% of students are proficient. So again, 41% of them are scoring in the met or exceeded proficiency level, as compared to ELA that was at 42. So we see that those are about balanced. Remember, I gave the example of if we have 10 students, that means that 4 of the 10 are proficient. And I'm left wondering, how can we help those 6 for every 10? That is my actual wondering. We've seen the overall math data. Now let's look at math data by grade level. Let's look at elementary and middle school grades 3 through 8. Remember, on this slide, we are looking at 2 years worth of data. The dotted line represents last year's TCAP scores from 2025. The whole straight line represents this year's data from 2026 TCAP. Okay, so keep that in mind. The first thing I noticed was that fourth grade had the highest percent of students that met or exceeded expectations. Okay, that was also true for fourth grade. So I think that that's interesting. Then I noticed that seventh grade had the lowest percent of students that met or exceeded expectations. I also noticed that third grade dropped from 25 to 26. And I also noticed that sixth grade dropped from 25 to 26. So naturally, I'm wondering why those grades dropped. But I did notice an overall trend that was extremely concerning for me. I noticed that sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, being mostly middle school tiers, were lower across the board than the elementary grades, so third, fourth, and fifth. And naturally, I'm wondering why. The first thing that comes to my mind as a potential reason is a change in the approach to teaching math. Is it less hands on for middle school? Was it, or is it more lecture style in middle school? So just kind of wondering there. But then I also wonder on the parent end if there's less parent oversight when they get to middle school. So just potential reasons that might have caused this data to drop from elementary grades, so typically third, fourth, and fifth, to middle school grades. Now let's look at math scores for high school. As you can see, about 35% of students are considered proficient in math in high school. Now, this slide is a little bit tricky because I was left wondering, well, why is math data not broken down the same way that high school ELA data is? Remember, think back. For English high school, we had English 1 and English 2. For math, we don't have it broken down quite the same way. And I do have a couple of theories about why. I think it might be due to some districts offering math in different ways. What I mean by that is some districts offer Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, while other districts offer Integrated Math 1, Integrated Math 2, and Integrated Math 3. So I'm thinking that might be the reason why, but trust me, I will be doing more research because I do want to understand why the math high school data was reported differently than the English data. So there's that. Let's look at math by student groups. This slide mirrors the ELA by student groups slide in the fact that it's super dense. And again, I want the conviction to be the same. I did not want to break up these data pieces. I wanted them side by side. Remember, I'm only going to read out the 26 proficiency levels, and I'm only going to be reading the percentages for students that were in the met and exceeded categories. I'm also going to, again, report them from lowest to highest for 26, okay? So at number 1, at 12% of students being proficient were students with disabilities. 2, students that were considered economically disadvantaged at 22%. Black students at 24% of them being in the met or exceeded categories. English learners at 24%. Hispanic students at 30%. White students at 49%. And at the very top, Asian students at 73% of them being in the exceeded or met proficiency levels. So, of course, I'm noticing the same things that I noticed earlier. The same student groups are at the top and the same student groups are at the bottom, excuse me. So, wondering why is that and what is being done to close these gaps. Okay, so as I transition out of talking about math data, I do want to mention a couple of things. First, I have chosen to leave off the social studies data. It has been reported. I chose to leave it off. And science data is not yet available, okay? I also want to end by saying that I wholeheartedly believe in reading and interpreting information for yourself. So, with that being said, I do have a link below for the full report in its entirety. Again, I support going and looking at that full report for yourself to make sure that you have all the information you need to develop your own sense of thinking, okay? So, again, that's linked below. Congratulations on making it to what I would argue the most entire part of the entire presentation. Next steps for parents. Parents, the first thing I want you to do is to access and interpret your child's TCAP scores. Their scores in math, ELA, and social studies will be available on Tuesday, July 21st. Science will be available at the end of August. I have placed the direct link to the parent portal down below for you to access. Once you're in the portal, you will have access to a personalized student video report of your child's scores. They will also provide you with sample TCAP questions to give you an insider scoop on what their test questions look like. Next, they provide you with questions that you can ask teachers about your child's scores to get a deeper understanding. And last but not least, they provide you with historical data so that you can look at your child's progress and achievement over time. So you've assessed their data, you've interpreted it. Now what? Now, number two, I want you to discuss your TCAP scores with your child. Sit them down. And as a pro tip, I would ask before even looking at it with them, what do you think you scored in math, ELA, science, and social studies? And see what they say. Did they say good? Why? Did they say they think that they performed badly? Well, why? Ask them why. Then show them their scores. Ask them, how did their scores align with their assumption? Was it far off? Was it close? Talk about it. And then from there, I want you to set new goals with them. What do they want to strive for in math, ELA, science, or social studies for this upcoming school year? Okay, now you've assessed the data. You've discussed it with your child. Well, now what? Step three, I want you to discuss TCAP scores with an educator. I want you to talk with their old teacher, their new teacher, or even a school leader because right now teachers aren't back in school, but school leaders should be. In the report, they did provide you with some questions, but feel free to create your own, ask your own questions. But what I want you to make sure of is that you walk away with a clear understanding of what the data means and what steps you and your child are going to take next, okay? That's what I want you to do as parents. There can be a lot of negativity surrounding state testing. What I don't want us to try to do is to determine a child's future based off of a single data point. My hope is that we will use state testing results as an opportunity to determine our next steps at both a micro and macro level. Throughout this presentation, there are so many topics that I either glazed over or didn't address at all. But don't fret, we are going to explore those topics together. Until then, take care.